There were four main visions of how Reconstruction would play out after the Civil War in 1865. First, there was the Freedmen's Vision. These former slaves wanted more than just their independence and freedom from slavery. Of course, they wanted that, but they also wanted political rights and citizenship, including the right to vote. They hoped for economic opportunities and autonomy as well, and this really meant land ownership. Many of the former slaves believed that they should and would receive some of the land that they had worked on for generations, and they hoped this land would be secured for them, but ultimately this didn't really work out. The Freedmen's Bureau was the first major social welfare project of the federal government in 1865, and it expanded healthcare and educational opportunities for former slaves, but really the attempt to redistribute land failed, especially when some of the land that had been given to African Americans during the fighting of the Civil War was given back to the white landowners when Andrew Johnson became president. But ultimately, the Freedmen's Bureau was successful in building 3,000 schools that served about 150,000 men, women, and children. And it was also very successful in creating more healthcare opportunities and services for the freed slaves. The next vision of Reconstruction was the vision of the presidents. So this presidential Reconstruction from 1865 to 1867 was very moderate in its reforms towards blacks. And it was also very lenient towards ex-Confederates who had rebelled against the Union. So for example, Lincoln's 10% plan pardoned the rebels who swore allegiance to the Union and agreed to accept the abolition of slavery. So his plan called for 10% of the voters who voted in the 1860 election to swear an oath to the United States and to outlaw slavery in the state. And this would mean that the state was reconstructed and that they would be free to re-enter the Union. So you can see that there's very little requirement or little reform expected on behalf of the southern states. Andrew Johnson, who replaced Lincoln and is pictured here to the right, he replaced Lincoln after he was assassinated in 1865. Johnson pardoned all the ex-Confederates with less than $20,000 in wealth, believing that they weren't responsible for the Civil War at all, as well as he pardoned 13,000 others. And he ultimately gave all the land that had been acquired by African Americans during the course of the Civil War. He gave this land back to the Southern white landholders. Next, we have the white Southern vision for and hope for Reconstruction. They really wanted to just be able to re-enter the Union without sacrificing any of their wealth or power. They fought for the removal of federal troops from the South and hoped to continue to control the black population. Therefore, they were against black suffrage, rights of black people, and the citizenship for former slaves. They also hoped to maintain a black labor system to work on their land as sharecroppers. Here on the left, we see the early Ku Klux Klan of the 1860s who fought to continue to oppress African Americans. The black codes were an attempt by the Southern white population to maintain this labor system and a society similar to the time of slavery. Black codes in Southern states enforced segregation, made free blacks sign year-long contracts, and established curfews. They also forbid large gatherings of African Americans, and black people could be arrested for loitering or not working. This meant that if they were arrested, then a white landholder could come bail them out of jail and force them to pay off the debt by working the land. So these black codes really upset Northerners, especially the radical Republicans. And this brings us to Congressional Reconstruction from 1867 to 1870, which also was known as Radical Reconstruction. A civil rights bill was passed in 1866 over the veto of Andrew Johnson. It was the first time in U.S. history that Congress had overridden a presidential veto. The next was the radical Republicans. They passed the Reconstruction Act of 1867, which voided the Southern state governments and divided the South into military districts. This act permitted Black suffrage and excluded former Confederate leaders from voting. The radical Republicans, led by Thaddeus Stevens here on the top and Charles Sumner on the bottom right, clearly had more intention of reforming Southern society. They managed to pass the 14th Amendment in 1868, which gave freed slaves citizenship, guaranteed equality before the law, and upheld the civil rights by outlawing the black codes. The 15th Amendment was ratified in 1870, which gave all black men the right to vote. The vote could no longer be denied because of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, but the Southern whites would not stop trying.